All right. Thank you, Johnny, for that introduction. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Quick time check. It is 4 p.m. We are most of the way through the inaugural AI and Banking Conference. Thank you all for being here. Quick show of hands. Who in the audience came here today just for this panel? All right, quick show of hands. Who in the audience is still fully awake? Well, we'll keep you awake for another 40 minutes. And after this, we have the official winner of the Startup Demo Days coming up, too. So there's a lot of hot content coming up. But hang on to your seat. I want to introduce everybody on this panel quickly and then get into the topic, which is AI's role in creating successful and robust bank fintech partnerships, something that applies to everybody here today. Marty, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. I'm Marty O'Malley. I'm an assistant general counsel at Prosper Marketplace, and I'm also chairwoman of the board of directors of the American Fintech Council.
Hi, I'm Ryan Christiansen. I am the executive director of the Stena Fintech Center here at the University of Utah. Also serve on FDX's co-chair of certification.
I'm Jim Jackson. I'm the SVP of Strategic Partner Oversight at WebBank.
Hi, I'm Andy Owens, and I'm a partner in the New York office of Steptoe LLP.
And Nick Milanovic. I write This Week in Fintech and invest out of the Fintech Fund. So, diving right into it, most people here know that the success of a fintech is usually predicated on the success of its relationship with its bank partners. And so I'm curious to hear from our panelists, because we have such a range of perspectives here, from the university side to the bank side to the fintech side. What is the most interesting application of AI in financial services as it pertains to the bank fintech partnership that you've come across in your experience recently?
I think that one's for me. So the thing that we think is most interesting has been discussed somewhat at length here, so I won't waste a lot of time on it. But among the things that we think that we can do is to use AI to comb through many of our back-end processes. So when an agent comes and takes a phone call, we can have a holistic view of the customer. We don't have to go through multiple systems to try and figure out what the customer interactions have been. It will come up and it will show us customer communications, customer calls, customer application information, all of that to pop up at the same time so that the customer doesn't have to wait while the agent goes through and tries to figure out the previous history with the company. I sort of think about it the way my mother, shockingly, thinks about companies. My mother will say to me, "But they know. I've dealt with them for years." And I'm like, oh, there's so many systems. But ultimately, I think my mother might be right.
I can tell you the least practical application so far is I asked AI what jacket I should wear today, and this is what I came up with. So that's out. The seeing some interesting things from the university perspective. Been working with some industry partners around, again, customer service, but figuring out those kind of big concepts that are happening in customer service, and then taking that and figuring out, okay, now how do we structure the data that's coming out of that to start actually giving us insights? Understanding, of course, that when you're looking especially at phone calls, that a lot of things are not being picked up on, right? So you have some of the emotion and everything else that happens in phone calls that doesn't get picked up on, and how do you account for that when you're trying to build some of these tools? So I think that's a very interesting one. We've heard a lot about compliance today, and I know that we've seen some early success there, but I think that those insights from the customers are early ones that we've seen.
I think similarly for us, it's probably not the most interesting, right? It's probably just the most practical, which we've had. I think we're still on a quest for the most interesting applications to really figure out what those are. I think that's a lot of why we're here today. We have found success in leveraging it for complaints and voice of the customer. We've had success with internal processes and policies. But I don't think any of those qualify yet as interesting. I think we're still on a quest for some of the more interesting applications.
I guess one interesting application I've discussed with some of the folks in this industry is very specific, and this may be too in the weeds, but both Reg E and Reg Z have pretty burdensome dispute resolution provisions, right? Getting statements and the consumer complains about unauthorized use, or more interesting to me is complaints that a purchase wasn't delivered on time, or the quality of the product wasn't very good, and the fintech partner or the bank has to go do the research to do a reasonable investigation, which is a lot of pressure and a lot of intense customer service time to go figure out and do that research. Call the merchant, talk to the consumer, get the paperwork, right? And most of the staff who do that at banks or partners are overburdened, right? And they may not have the experience they really need, because you don't do massive Z and E trainings in billing error resolution, right? And so one bank I've talked to is trying to develop AI. I mean, maybe this is more of a wish list, but it's sort of in the process of developing AI so that it's a first level customer service agent, so the agents who are doing this resolution can ask the AI, what is the likelihood, A, that this is, a legitimate dispute, right? They give the inputs and sort of get out, right, some sort of discussion of, yes, this kind of dispute over this sort of, like restaurants, right, or airlines, right? There is legitimacy or there isn't, based on its understanding of contractual terms or whatever in that industry. I mean, and just as a baseline, it can help you identify problematic merchants, right? Merchants who are, there's a lot of chargebacks, right? It lets you contact the merchant or contact the network, to try to solve these problems. So there's a lot that I think AI can do in that space to help these, overburdened and perhaps inexperienced agents comply with this really, really tricky and burdensome law.
I love asking the AI what jacket to wear. I think that's what we refer to in the Gen AI community as a hallucination.
Exactly. Well, it didn't take into account weather and the fact that we'd have a lot of bankers here, so I forgot to put the bad inputs.
So we've seen a lot of this in the demo days today. We've talked a lot about this at other panels today. One of the early use cases that a lot of people are spending time on in the application of AI and machine learning is to vendor management and oversight, fintech program partner oversight. But I'm curious to hear from people, given the variety of perspectives that we have on the panel today, will AI become the end-all be-all in successfully conducting vendor and partner oversight? Or what are the limitations you see versus the advantages? Maybe we can start with the banker on the panel.
Sure. So end all be all, I don't know. Hard to say. There is a lot of expertise required in structuring, creating, and overseeing these kinds of partnerships. But one of the things we have seen is that partnerships are all different. And it requires some bespoke oversight strategy for each of those partners to understand what they're doing, how they're doing it. And AI does seem to there seems to be an opportunity to level the playing field, so to speak, across those various partnerships, where it doesn't all have to be custom. We can look for similarities, and again, in just very simple, like I've already mentioned, complaints, like a way that rather than having to individually think about how each partnership works and what their product and offering is, the AI tools can help us use a similar strategy to oversee those. That hopefully lessens the burden somewhat on both the bank and the fintech to be able to work together. So I do think there is a lot of opportunity for helping those relationships and those oversight strategies smoothen out.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that just another sort of specific area, which is UDAP, right? UDAP, people always say, well, there's no sort of codified UDAP. It's this sort of amorphous, inchoate sort of set of rules that you either know it or you don't. And I think that's true to a certain extent, but, there is 100 years of UDAP cases out there that have basically could form a set of rules if you've got something that can sort of see all those cases and generate rules from it, right? So the FTC, even with the CFPB and the Fed, had UDAP authority and was enforcing in terms of marketing and advertising, what you can say, what you can't say, right? Some of those issues are going to be common across the partners, right? So if you can have an AI that you can sort of ask it a question, it's going to sort of sift through in terms of fair lending, in terms of, unfairness, in terms of marketing, whatever the subject area is, and then pick up on the strands that you're saying, right? So if you're advertising like pre-screen, right, or advertising pre-approved, either for a bank account or a credit card, right, you can sort of look and see in terms of those sources sources, you know, you could really pull out strings from previous, I mean, it's a little bit like ML, like machine learning, but I also think if you've got a smart enough predictive AI, you can really ask it, like, do we think this is going to be compliant right up front? And it's going to kick back, I think, syntheses from all these different cases and actions, consent orders from the past.
Yeah, and I'll add to that in that UDAP's great because we have had a lot of years and a lot of experience, and that's what we haven't had yet with AI applications of managing partnerships. You know, now we've got Synapse in front of us, and we can all admit that was a disaster, and we can all learn from it, but we don't have a big data set yet to start learning from there. There's some ways that I think we can get there, getting some standards together. We've heard a little bit about that. Once we start having standards, then we'll know how to look at things a little bit differently. And getting from a principles approach at the regulatory level, because there's a lot of regulation around partnerships right now, but it's very principles based. And so how do we get from that principles to the standards so then we can start applying something?
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and I think, right, because you can use the AI to sort of almost generate like a regulation, like actual language that you can, technical rules that you can follow. And of course, you need a human being to go back and test that and sort of vet it, right? Because UDAP is amorphous and inchoate, and you never quite know. But the other thing is, right, I mean, there are probably, third parties who will do this for you. Bloomberg News is probably developing this, I don't know, but they're very expensive. And so if banks can start develop these things internally, right, I think you'd save a lot of money as opposed to going to a third party or outside counsel. Not that I want you to save money not going to outside counsel, but I mean, the point is, like, there are opportunities for you to sort of streamline and structure these compliance issues so makes it easier across the board.
Marty, any thoughts? Prosper's been around for so long. What have you seen?
So we do see some of these things. In UDAP, it's a great example. Like, we use a lot of judgment in trying to decide what is UDAP-y. It's a word that actually exists. That seems so UDAP-y, and we kick it back to the business. And so to have the ability to kick back, to have some authority other than our own judgment and our own good actorship, another word that doesn't really exist, is very helpful. It's an incredible use of AI. It's the single biggest thing that we think about all the time. Is it UDAP-y?
I just assume when we say UDAP, we mean we can't think of why else it's wrong, so we say UDAP.
I agree.
But to your point, it's fairly well known, and we've had a lot of time to find the signals in the noise, and I think that's where AI can be really helpful here, because it can find the signals in the noise a lot better than us humans can. And I think it also lends itself to transparency, because even if you look at the Synapse, in the postmortem, there's a lot of evidence that there was indications of what was happening, but that transparency between the fintech and the bank partner is a place where I think also is assisted by AI.
And joking aside on UDAP, I do think it helps. The AI definitely assists in taking that, it just something feels weird, or, in the past where we were doing like simple keyword searching to look for something that might be UDAP related, the AI can now pick up on language and tone and feeling in a way that does take some of the guesswork out that may come from just an individual reader of a complaint or a customer interaction.
So Marty, Andy, just to paraphrase your advice, it was replace your general counsel with AI?
I don't remember saying that exactly,
So something that we're dancing around here, but it's an interesting corollary to this question, is the question of liability. So effectively, you can have AI that complements and augments your oversight, compliance, and vendor management strategy. But at the end of the day, you may have an error in an AI model that's returning information about your portfolio or your partner's portfolio or program. But at the end of the day, that doesn't absolve you from responsibility. So there's still a big liability question here if you are using an AI to help with oversight. I'm curious how people think about that.
Well, I would say that AI for us is never used solely. There's back testing that happens. There are processes and channels that are in place to sort of monitor the results of our AI. We are not yet, and I do not foresee us to be in a place where AI, is its own operative. I think someone referred to it as the smart dude sitting next to you earlier in the day. I do not foresee a time immediately when the smart dude is operating without supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that the purpose of this panel is to use of AI to improve efficiency. And so, right, if you're using AI in this context, so you have fewer battles with your business clients, or you're saving money by going to third parties, or you're using learning at the bank level that could extend to all the partners, or you're just synthesizing bright line rules that you can apply going forward, even though you might want to double check them or come up with arguments yourself. Like that's all just improving efficiency, I think. But it's never going to replace the actual analysis that you'd have to do, right? I don't think.
So AI is really more of a workflow solution for testers rather than a tester itself.
That's right.
We are just breezing through these questions. We're going to have a lot of extra time for Q&A. Normally you get 5 fintech people on a panel. You can't shut us up. But we're doing a great job on timing today. So the last question that we had that I think is the most interesting question is what would the top of your wish list be for AI and generative AI and financial services? What haven't you seen yet that you've thought, this would actually be a really cool application. This would make my life easier. This would make the company better. Anybody can take that one.
So I can start. I mean, we're constantly kicking around ideas around compliance testing, issue management. I mean, if I think through like just the pillars of any compliance program, like we're going to be a very compliance focused shop, and that's what we're going to think about. Of like how can we better understand exactly what's happening at the partner day to day with that customer, whether it's disclosures, following policy and procedure, or customer interactions, like anything that can help us better understand that, or take a person out who's doing what might maybe like tedious testing of information. I think those are, I don't know if they're exciting. They're exciting to me of like to be able to have someone take some of those people out of the loop to make it just more standardized.
I can give you kind of a not that exciting of an example, but for me it's kind of exciting as a now academic, having been an academic for about 2 years now. The financial management space is super interesting to me because there's so much good information about how to implement good financial advice and what the best financial advice is, but there's really been a lack of real insights for consumers on how to actually have this be real to them at the right moment in time. And so, like at the university, we're exploring right now, how can we develop something using AI that can predict someone's balance 30 days into the future with a very high level of confidence? That's an expensive thing to do, and it's largely probably not happening in the industry right now because it is kind of expensive, and how do you get a price point that someone wants to actually pay for that? But I think if we can solve that problem, which is a complete AI kind of problem, it opens up a lot of other things that are helpful for consumers. So that's one thing that we're thinking about, and it's, to me, I look at a student body that doesn't have a lot of money generally, and the ability to say, hey, what's the balance in my account the day before payday? I think that's a really cool use case that we could build a lot of other things from.
I can't say mine's all that interesting, but I can say it would be super phenomenal for someone in my position. So at Prosper, we have spent enormous numbers of people hours looking through state law compliance. So 50 state surveys on telephone communications, on debt collections, on all sorts of different issues that are state by state, statute by statute, incredible detail by incredible detail. So it is time-consuming and detailed to create the surveys.
And really expensive.
And really expensive. to do this. So it is a huge burden. And not only do you create it, but then you have to maintain it. So for each of these 50 states, you have to go back. Did the state legislatures change it? What did that change mean? Does it matter? Does it not matter? And then to apply it to our business plan. So it's not even enough to know what the changes are, but also to apply it to what you're actually doing. If AI could take that problem off my plate, I would be delighted.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that's just sort of taking that issue, the idea we were talking about with UDAP earlier, and sort of expanding it across the entire body of law in the United States, which would be actually really nice. So I guess my wish list came out of a discussion I was having. So the CFPB put out this sort of credit card rewards spotlight thing back in May, I think, or April, where they were sort of all these sort of UDAP issues they were talking about with offering, banks issuing rewards either with a partner or with a completely separate entity, like a co-brand partner. And the CFPB warned about all these sorts of things, but one of the things they were warning about was, this idea of gaming and fraud in this space, right? Which is, we want you to be more specific about to consumers as to what sorts of things you consider gaming, because usually the consequences are you forfeit all your rewards, you lose all your cash, you lose all your points, or whatever. And so, there's several questions that arise out of that, which is, how do you disclose this in an agreement and tell people what's bad, right, without actually disclosing the specifics to the fraudsters, and that just raises the question, right? There's always new fraud. Like they're always coming up with new ideas to cheat the system to get more cash and more rewards. So my dream would be to have some sort of generative AI where, for example, one of the examples is this called manufactured spend, right, where fraudsters will use the product to look like they're spending a lot and getting the rewards because of that, but they're not actually they're doing something, right, that they're actually keeping the value of the spend. So for example, there's this complicated scheme that I don't totally understand where people will use cards to buy really expensive business class refundable fares on airlines, and then on the day of the flight or whatever, downgrade, right, to get the fare difference between the business and the coach, right, which can be quite a lot of money, and have it refunded to a different payment instrument or to a bank account, right? Which a lot of merchants won't let you do that, but there's still some that would, right? So the consumer is getting all those points or all that cash back, and they're, and they're actually, sort of clawing back 2/3 of that spend, right? So there's a million different examples of that in the market, and it's hard to anticipate. And once one of these schemes is identified and shut down, right, it's like whack-a-mole. It'll filter through the blogs and all through the Reddits and all that stuff. And then you have to figure out what the next scheme is. It would be really nice if you could, to ask a generative AI, like, to be creative, right? Like, what is the next level? What is the next step that these people are going to come up with, right? And try to anticipate that, on sort of a large scale, right? And get example after example to try to shut that stuff down.
Marty, I like the example you brought up was specifically the less exciting applications of AI. It seems like that's going to be the first area in financial services broadly where you actually see real winning applications, because it, in a sense, is going to be a great tool for freeing up our capacity from doing some of the more low-level and repetitive work that we do to actually having more capacity to do with some of the more nuanced and high-level work, or that's the hope at least. With all that being said, we have the benefit of so many big brains on the stage today, so much perspective from different angles. If this were a GLG call, it would probably cost about $20,000. So let's make the most of this opportunity and take advantage. We'd love to open it up to audience questions. Does anybody want to jump in?
I'll ask a question, actually. Nick, you're somewhat of a rarity in that you're on the investment side from all the panelists that we've had today. I'll kick it off with questions and just ask, what are you seeing at the very early stage with new startups and their applications of AI, specifically in the context of these bank relationships?
It's a really good question, and I'm curious for other perspectives here. But I spend a lot of time looking at pre-seed and seed stage companies. So usually this is companies in the first 2 years of their life cycle. There's a lot of talk about AI with early stage fintech companies right now, and I was talking with Alex Johnson at Fintech Takes about this earlier today. I kind of group the pitches generally into two categories. One is existing product with AI added on top of it, so bookkeeping plus AI automation, investment analysis plus AI, equities research plus AI. To me, it feels like that's not necessarily a sustainable business differentiation, and that a lot of the legacy providers are going to have the same access to the underlying LLMs that a lot lot of these new providers are wrapping. And so unless they have a nuanced and differentiated way to really offer that product to their end customers, it doesn't seem like that's going to be a sustainable moat. The other pitches, and this is a much, much smaller segment, fall into the category of, hey, we're actually going to provide a net new product to the end user that's in this category, but we're using an LLM or we're using machine learning in order to offer it in a way that it hasn't been offered before. And this is actually anathema to the business model of the legacy provider, and that maybe we're lowering costs like effectively down to zero and then selling add-ons, or maybe we're offering this in a way that just conflicts directly with kind of the core moneymaker of legacy providers. That's much rarer, but it's much more interesting. To kind of take previous analogies by example, electrification was introduced in the US about 30 years before electricity became common in factories. And so the first use case for electricity was consumer, home light bulbs, things that didn't really have kind of like broader industrial ramifications. But eventually factories caught up and electrified. One of the questions is, why does it take 30 years? Well, it's because a lot of factories were using steam power, which had a lower throughput rate. And so the only way that they would apply electricity is if they retrofit steam engines by replacing them with electricity. Well, that's kind of taking an old production method and then basically using a new technology in a way that's not necessarily efficient because you're retrofitting and just slapping the technology on top. So I think that kind of approach to financial services at the early stage isn't really going to work. But then when you build net new factories that are based around assembly lines that are electrified, you actually have much higher throughput. You can lower your marginal cost and you become more competitive as a result. And so I think we're kind of at the very early stage where we haven't seen a lot of that yet, but it's going to be really interesting where we see net use cases where let's take an example. Providing M&A counsel for a mid-market acquisition, which used to cost so much, we'll actually be able to see a company radically drop the costs there. It's a very nuanced activity, and so it'll take a while to actually build an AI that is capable of taking away most of the value of that from service providers. But when that happens, it's going to be really interesting because that will actually challenge the dominant legacy providers. Curious if anybody else's thoughts, though.
I mean, my sense is that startups are usually I think they're a little bit naive about the amount of work that needs to be done to setting up a financial services business, right? Just in terms of the massive number of templates and documentation you have to get, merchant agreements with the processor acquirers if that's the business, or figuring out what the NACHA rules in FedNow or whatever, clearinghouse. Like, there's just so much, I think, that leanly staffed, although backed with a lot of money, startups may have to figure out. And so so it seems like putting the burden on them to have use AI for all this stuff is a little bit seems a little extreme, because there's just so much for them that they're not familiar with, right, in starting these things up. Usually, not always. So I would think it's the banks. It's more for the bank to sort of have AI ready to go in terms of assisting these things to get set up to the fact, and to the extent that the bank is helping. But yeah, that's my sense. That's my impression, in my experience.
What other burning questions can we answer?
Yeah, so of the $200 to $340 million that's going to be added in value to the banking sector, a lot of that is said to be coming through productivity. How are you managing your employees' both fears and excitement around AI? And what's your strategy to upskill and keep your teams relevant in the AI space?
I think I have kind of a good answer to this one. So this does come back to customer complaints, and we've spent time on customer complaints. But if you think about your customer complaints, your volume, say whatever it might be, maybe 5% of the customer complaints are actual complaints. Maybe 95% of them are some sort of communication. And we have teams now that go through every single one of those communications to figure out what that is and to categorize it. And then we have a second team that goes back through to figure out if the first team categorized it properly. And then we have a third team that goes back through and samples to figure out if the first and the second team categorize them properly. I can tell you that the agents who do this are not the most enthusiastic about going back through the third time. So if AI can help do that, then not only does it speed the process, but also it increases agent engagement, because now we don't have to have the headcount on this task that not even the person doing the task particularly likes. And to be transparent, we do experience turnover in this area because it's a tedious task. We can take those same people and we can put them to more difficult, more challenging, more engaging tasks. And so some of those activities that we're not able to get to because of their cost or some of their difficulty, we can now put those resources to work on those tasks. So not always, right? Change is difficult for people, but when you see that it's put to them this way, that we're actually going to give you a better, more interesting, more engaging job, people really like that.
Yeah, I heard from a bank recently that was doing an implementation in the wealth management space. So they were essentially running a co-pilot with the wealth manager so that it was kind of enhancing those conversations they were having with their clients in real time. So it really was kind of helping those wealth managers with their job already so that the information was the best information delivered at the right time. So I think that's some of the early implementations. It doesn't bring down cost necessarily like what you're talking about right now, but I think it's a way that employees are seeing benefits.
I think our risk and technology teams have done a really great job encouraging the use of AI and documenting in what applications we can use it and should use it, and really embracing it. You know, as a financial institution that works with very cutting edge fintechs, you know, we need to know and understand the technologies that are out there, and our teams have done a great job of really communicating that and encouraging it. Everything from regular like lunch and learns and setting clear policies and encouraging where to use it. You know, I remember the first time I wanted to use AI to develop a policy, and I was really nervous of like, I don't know what I'm allowed to do. Can I even log into this from my bank laptop without getting in trouble? And going to the teams and asking and being encouraged both to use it, and it wasn't too long after that, they were already in the process of working on policies. Like that clear communication to employees of like what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and encouraging that use, I think has really kept excitement up for it. It's then been educational as well, and then helps us in supporting our partners who are also embracing the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I mean, part of the use of AI, I think, with employees is to not, they shouldn't have to be the ones to figure out how to use it, right? It's going to just be clear. Like, it's sort of a tool that they have at their disposal that somebody else has developed for that specific use, right? So if you're developing something to facilitate dispute, like I was saying, dispute resolution, then you'd want to have a very specific set of ways that the employees who do that can use the AI, right? They shouldn't have to be figuring out the sort of innovations about how they should use it or what questions they should ask, right? It should be given to them as a module. And you can use this in training too, right? Like if you're doing customer service reps, right? Here is AI. Here the AI bot is going to start giving you the sorts of questions. They're going to synthesize the sort of stuff that the bank has gotten in the past or the fintech partner has gotten in the past, and they're going to start asking you questions as a training exercise, and you have to sort through and identify, you know, what kind of responses you're going to get, what verbatim scripts you need to use, right, as a training exercise. Or, you know, if it's underwriting, right, the people who do their underwriting, they will be given a tool that they can use like other tools. But I think that's sort of a very specific use of AI that doesn't put the burden on the employees to figure out how best to use it, but it's sort of given to them as this sort of box that they can use and they should use as they go about their business. I think that would improve efficiency. Does that make sense?
And just to round the thought out, if you'll forgive me for continuing to fall back on past innovations as a crutch to understand the application of AI, in the 1970s, when ATMs were introduced to bank branches across the United States, there was early opposition from tellers who feared that they would lose their jobs because ATMs would automate away a lot of what they were doing. The number of tellers in bank branches actually rose after the addition of ATMs. And the going theory goes that when tellers customers weren't solely responsible for deposits and withdrawals. They were actually freed up in order to provide more high-value customer support to the consumers' banks, and banks ended up growing their footprint and growing their total number of depositors as a result, and then relying more heavily on tellers for more nuanced operations. So it's an imperfect example, but it's entirely possible that similarly here, the efficiencies created by the implementation of AI in financial services may actually lower costs or increase the applicable number of customers who actually can engage with financial services as a result.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing to add to that, which is sort of a little bit of an ancillary point, but in terms of if we're wanting to increase efficiency as in the partnerships, we do need to make sure, or at least I think both partners need to make sure that they're using AI in the same way, because you don't want dueling UDAP opinions, right? That's a little bit hard, because if you're developing your own AI and it's proprietary, then sharing it with the bank or sharing it with the fintech may be a little tricky. And if each partner can use the AI to inform whatever their position is going to be, right, and train it or whatnot. But I do think that if there's a common approach, it would be a lot easier so that there's fewer conflicts.
We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. Would love to hear from somebody who is skeptical about AI. Maybe we can get a little bit of a confrontational question to end things on. Does anybody have reservations that they want to hear about? Anybody have kind of burning questions in the back of your head? AI skepticism. We won't call out anybody for being a Luddite.
Well, I guess if you're attending an AI conference, you probably don't hate AI too much.
Yeah. AI curious. Sounds good. Well, I would love to give a big hand to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today.